Welcome to Interviews from Mexico. I'm Laura Carlsen, and I'll be your host as we look at cutting-edge issues with the men and women who know them best, here on Telesur. The coalition that brought Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador to power in the July 1st elections here in Mexico was called Juntos Haremos Historia. Together we'll make history. And they did. The elections broke records and they broke molds. They broke records because it was the highest number of voters to come out for an election in history. And it was also the highest number of voters to vote for one single candidate. He won with 53% of the votes, and many new, especially young people, were added to the voter rolls. It broke molds because it's the first time in recent history that Mexico has elected a left-leaning candidate. There's a lot of talk about what this means for the nation itself, but so far not much has been said what it means for the region. And to talk about that, we're very fortunate to have with us here in the studio Christophe Ventura. Christophe, thanks for joining us here on Telesur.
Hello, thanks for inviting me. It's a great honor, pleasure to be here.
Christophe is a Latin American expert at the Institute for International Relations and Strategies in Paris, France. And he wrote the book, Latin America, The Rise of a New Continent, Geopolitics of Latin America. Christophe, I want to ask you, what does this mean for Latin America, and what do you think that people are thinking about a country as large and powerful as Mexico making this kind of a decision?
Well, for Latin America, this election could mean new things. For the moment, it's too early to say really what it would become. But with AMLO on the government, a lot of challenges will be asked to Mexico for the region. Mexico is a country which is at the center of the main dominant trade policies and dynamics all over the world. Obviously, with the U.S. through the NAFTA, but also with the Pacific alliances with the more, let's say, center-right and liberal, in the sense economic liberal, of countries of Latin America, Peru, Chile, Colombia, and they are also trying, this country today is trying to organize a sort of new convergence with the countries of the Mercosur, so the common markets of the southern countries, Brazil, Argentina, and all this framework will be the one where AMLO will have to deal with, and this is what is very exciting, is to know what he will do in this context.
Yeah, well, let's break that down a little bit, because Mexico has played a role of supporting the United States in attempting to create this free trade area of the Americas, really, but without having it called that, since, of course, that plan was defeated by left-leaning governments in South America in 2005. Traditionally, in the whole neoliberal period, the last 30 years of Mexican history, what the United States has said goes, and they've supported that kind of thing. What would happen in South America now if Mexico began to take a more independent path?
Yes, I think that's what AMLO means for the country and also for maybe Latin America. It's more sovereignty for Mexico in its relationships all over the world, for all its partnerships. It will depend on the relationships that Lopez Obrador will have with Mr. Trump, but we know that today Mexico is trying to find a sort of diversification of its economic and geopolitical and political relations all over the world. It means more with the 1,000 countries, it means more with China, it means more too with the European Union. Mexico is today also trying to update its TLC with the EU. So Lopez Obrador will have to deal with that too. There are a lot of contradictions, but also the wish, the main orientation of AMLO seems to be more sovereignty to Mexico, and this could play a new role in all these dynamics.
He's talked very specifically about national sovereignty being at the center of his foreign policy, without having said too much so far about that foreign policy, especially respecting Latin America. if he does manage to create this new guideline of Mexican interests, how do you think he's likely to construct those relationships with the rest of the region, and what does that mean? Because what's interesting is we're in a context that's much different than it was in the past. The pink tide has receded. We have many governments that were left of center, more aligned with the kind of program that Lopez Obrador is trying to carry out, and have now turned to the right. In fact, some people say that this is a surprising decision in the midst of what many considered a tendency to return to the kinds of models that Mexico has rejected. How do you place that regionally?
Yeah, because his election demonstrates that nothing is done in this country. It's still a sort of battle between right-wing and leftist governments and parties, etc., but also today competing with new political forces like evangelical churches all over the countries. So all this is a new context which is not very clear at the moment, but from this context will be written the new scenario for Latin America. When AMLO will be in charge, it will be basically next year, it will be in 2019, 1st of December, but he will arrive in charge with the new government in Brazil, and that's a key point to understand what will become what will be the potential.
And Brazil's election is completely up in the air.
Absolutely. So everything is open, unsure, and without any determination. But Mexico today, with Mr. Lopez Obrador in charge, could mean also more stability for Mexico, and that's, I think, what are expecting a lot of people who voted for him: more stability for the state, more stability for democracy, etc. In Mexico, and this will play obviously a key role also in the potential of this country regarding its relationships with the others. So, what could the contribution of this new government for Latin America could be to be more progressist, could be to be one of the more stable state in the context of a chaotic situation in a lot of countries like Brazil, etc. So that's what we will have to follow, this new face of Mexico in this regional context.
It's interesting that you use the word stable and talk about more stability in this new context, because the opposition to Lopez Obrador always made the exact opposite argument. They said if a left-wing government comes into power in Mexico, it will be an immediate challenge to the globalized international financial system. There will be repercussions. It will break down what Mexico has constructed in terms of its export-oriented model. And basically, there is a drastic scenario of the economy falling apart. But you're saying that the country is likely to be more stable now. Why do you say that?
Because that's what want the people of Mexico, and they voted for that. They voted
so
for
democracy is more
yes,
stable.
a more complete democracy, and this country is not a full democracy, as we all know. And today, AMLO is in power because people want all those problems to be solved with work-in-progress dynamics. Because nobody can ask to AMLO to arrive like a sort of a magician, no, and changing everything in this country. Obviously, it won't work like that. But I mean, the right-wing opposition and the opposition from AMLO obviously played their role in the campaign, trying to make AMLO probably what he's not. I mean, saying that he's a sort of a Cuba, Chavista, a new candidate, a sort of devil who will make communism in all the country.
And you think that there are very few parallels there?
No, I think it doesn't make sense. It has nothing to see with the reality. I mean, who can read the Lopez Obrador program, his books, can understand that he got a very moderate and pragmatic way to work and for the country. He knows exactly what is the balance of the forces in his countries. He knows the problems. He knows the importance, the weight of the economic powers in this country. He knows everything. So he will act step by step and trying, first of all, to restore something who will give more democracy to the country, and that's why he's talking.
And inequality has
inequality,
been a
and that's why
major
he's
theme.
talking about reconciliation. That's his concept, and I think that's what it means. So I think that the opposition.
Reconciliation between rich and poor, or on the foreign affairs.
Reconciliation of the nation, of the Mexican nation. So everybody will be will have to contribute to this process of building the restoration of democracy in Mexico. That's his challenge, and it's not easy. And this is his promise. So that's what will be. That's what he will try to do, and that's why I say that if he succeeds in this way, it will give more stability to this country, and more stability of Mexico means a new dynamic and a new possible contribution for this stability at the regional level.
And perhaps a new configuration of alliances.
Yes, sure. It will depend, I think, a lot about what will happen in Brazil. Just imagine if you, it depends on, will we have a progressive government, or will we have a right-wing government, or an extreme right-wing government? It will depend on that.
Between the two, they're by far the largest
Sure.
economies and most powerful economies.
The best
in the region.
scenario should be to have a progressive government and to have a real election in Brazil, letting all candidates to participate, like Lula, and we will have a new configuration with Brazil and Mexico. And I mean, it's just a scenario at this stage, but this will mean a new chapter for Latin America.
And particularly that kind of a new configuration, what do you think the advantages would be for the region? What's the program there that's most important in terms of the future of the entire region?
I think it's more autonomy from an economic point of view, more autonomy, less dependence of Latin America with global markets, less
Specifically the United States.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, the autonomy of the region need that kind of changes. It's absolutely key.
Well, what we've seen in Mexico is certainly that economic dependency, with 80% of trade going to one market, automatically creates political dependency. And that's why Mexico, you see in these forums, backing up the United States in almost all major decisions.
Absolutely, and that's what tried to do the government in the last decade, not to have a rupture, or not to reject any kind of relationships with the United States, but to organize a sort of a more great, important diversification, once again, of partnerships for all countries of the region, and a more regional integration, a more integrated way to deal with the global countries, the global actors of this globalization. And that's probably what AMLO and other countries, that's probably what they will try to build.
He's had a pretty reconciliation tone with the United States so far. In his speeches, he said, yes, I want a friendly relationship with the United States. I'm going to defend national sovereignty. But he really seems to be trying not to rock the boat there. And the same thing with the international financial community. His speech in the Zócalo, in the Central Plaza, when he won the elections, was very much directed, the first part of it, toward them. We're not going to expropriate. We're going to keep the Bank of Mexico autonomous. A number of measures that were clearly meant to send explicit signals to that community. Could the international financial community really throw a monkey wrench in this fourth transformation that AMLO's talking about? Do we have historical precedents for that within the region?
We could say that the Brazil of Lula was a bit in the same way at the beginning of in 2003, when Lula tried to organize at the same time a continuity for the private sector, the Brazilian one, a continuity for the investment, for the foreign investment in the country, and at the same time to obtain from the elites the possibility to organize more redistribution, more income redistribution, and modernization of the country through different public services. And also he convinced that it was not only a question of, let's say, ethic or moral to make public policies in order to fight poverty and inequalities, but it was also a question of economic efficiency in order to build people who are able to consume the products of the private sector in order to enhance the society
and stimulate the
internal market. And to stimulate the internal markets at the national level and to build this internal markets at the regional level means for Latin America the possibility to absorb the global crisis much more better than it was the case in 2008. Because if we are today in this situation, it's because first of all Latin America paid the price of the 2008 global crisis with all the commodities collapse, etc., who have complicated all the conditions.
The impact was extremely negative here.
And this is the let's say the origin of the political crisis for all the governments here in this region. So it's a lesson for the future. And I think that Mr. Lopez Obrador, which is coming now in charge, is coming after all this experience, and he knows that this way to build more sovereignty, autonomy, and internal markets for the country and maybe for Latin America should be a way to build more stability and justice in all the continents. So that's why I think it will be very exciting and interesting to follow what he will do and what he could do, because once again he's coming here in a country with very objective difficulties to govern. For a government, it's very complicated to govern Mexico with all the change we know, violence, corruption, narco-traffics, etc.
Yeah. Well, he clearly has a very strong mandate from the people, as we mentioned some of the numbers at the beginning of the program. You know, pundits like to find tendencies. And so when the center-left governments or left-leaning governments in Latin America were elected to power, in Argentina, Brazil, the Andean countries, you know, they talked about a pink tide. And everyone talks about a pink tide. And then the right wing came to power and they pronounced the pink tide over with, receded, and everyone talked about a tendency to turn to the right. And now we're seeing Mexico make another decision that's completely different. I mean, is this a tendency, or are we just saying a strange period in history where politics is all mixed up?
I think that it's much more complicated than this idea that the leftist government were defeated and we were entering a new right-wing cycle. I don't think this is the reality, and we have the proof that what's happening in this region is that everything is open everywhere, because including the right-wing new governments are in difficulties. I mean, look at Argentina, look at Brazil. Michel Temer, who has not been elected, is the
lowest popularity rate,
the less popular president of all Latin America for the last century. I mean, and look at them. The parties who organize the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff and etc. Today, their candidates are winning less than 1, 2, 3, 4% in the polls, investigation. So they have no solution to the situation they have created in Brazil. That's the problem they have. Look in Argentina, the social conflicts. Nothing has been solved by Macri. I mean, the social conditions are worse. The inflation, the difficulties for the people to live, and there are huge mobilization in this country. Look in Peru, what happened to the president of Peru. I mean, so it's not, on the one hand, the left has been eliminated from the picture, and now we got a strong right-wing government. No, it's not like this. I mean, today, to me, what is the main Latin America characteristic is that there is a real rejection of governments and political institutions by the people because of the economic and social crisis. So everything is open.
And corruption.
And
corruption on all sides has been something that's really...
And this has fed that kind of hunger in the peoples, in all the countries. So impact all governments, all institutions, whether they are from the left side or from the right side, it's the same. So everything is open. What is interesting, once again, is that someone like Lopez Obrador, who's coming back with a certain discourse, with a certain purpose, which is not to make a sort of socialist revolution. That's not his no. discourse, but just explaining that democracy is the key to solve progressively the problems of its society, and the way to have a new government out from corruption, etc. This is the way that we finding. This is the way, in which the progressist experiences are now reloading their strategy and their project for their countries, and it will be probably what will happen in other countries.
Well, that's interesting, because in this tendency to find tendencies, you know, there was like when the Berlin Wall fell and everyone said this is the end of history, the war of classes is over, and now we're going into some kind of a free trade paradise, you know. And now it's the same thing, that there are people were starting to say, well, now we see that those governments that tried to have greater state involvement, that tried to put restrictions on the free market model of creating developing country economies, failed somehow, politically, economically, and the people have gone back to the first. And now we see this, where people who have been under neoliberal rule for almost 30 years have decided it's time to try something else. What do you think the main characteristics, what kind of model are people looking for? Or can we talk about a model, or is it more just a series of practices that adapt to new realities and to an incredible number of injustices that free trade model generated in the past?
Well, I think that first of all, history shows that the Fukuyama prophecy was wrong. History never ends. I mean, and we have the concrete proof here and everywhere in the world. So nothing has happened like it was supposed to be after the Berlin Wall failed. So that's the first point. The second one is that, I mean, today in Latin America, sort of contradiction, but a positive one. One of the let's say the heritage of what has been made during the last 15 years in this region is that people have a real commitment with social justice, more equality, and the idea that there is a concrete relationship between equality, liberty, and democracy.
You mean the people, the population?
Yes, I mean in the broad, in the deep conscience of people. I mean, the people are still demanding that, and that's why with new forms, through new forms, who can be sometimes preoccupating, like because of this corruption story, for example, create a big anger for people. But behind this anger, what is asked? It's asked for more justice. It's asked for more access to human rights, real ones, who are not just formals, but it's also to have education, health, to have also access to security, and to have a government who represents the people's will. So that's what people want for their future, and people are highly conscious about that in Latin America. I'm coming from Europe. I'm coming from Europe, and I can say that I'm still surprised by the high level of political commitments of the people. I mean, people are talking about politics, are talking about, look at this campaign in Mexico. I mean, the participation has been huge, as you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation. The vote have been clear, was very clear. People were asking concrete things, and they didn't. They were not confused by the other candidates. I mean, they want to go in that way. So that's the proof.
Yeah, the official candidate had between 15 and 16% of the vote.
It's historical. I mean,
what does it mean, do you think, for the relationship with the European Union? What kind of expectations do people have there? Not to speak for the entire European Union, but for progressive sectors, for example, that you work most closely with?
There are a lot of expectation. I hope not too much, because it's always more simple to project your desire, no, on someone who is in charge today when you are in the minority, which is the case of a lot of leftist people in Europe. So I think that we have to preserve Lopez Obrador for too much for a sort of idealization, projection of all our
your own desire,
etc. But it will be clearly a reference, because the campaign have been followed very strongly in my country, in France, but also in all Europe, including by mainstream sectors. Why? Because Mexico is a great nation historically. I mean, Mexico means something all over the world. All of us, we have some Mexican stuff in our head for one or another reasons. So it's a country who plays a role, and today we hope that he will find once again the way to be what he is. I mean, a great nation. So that's what people are observing in Europe, and so this election is very welcome, because everybody knows that that's also a chance, an opportunity for Mexico to not become a failed state. I mean, probably Lopez Obrador is someone who is the last option to give democracy and, once again, normal institutions to the Mexican state. If not, this country will become something very scary.
Well, thank you so much. We've come to the end of the program very quickly. Christophe Ventura, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. We'll be back next week on Interviews from Mexico.